How are you, Prep 3 students? Today we're going to have a quick revision based on the novel questions related to Chapter 1, A Tale of Two Cities. Before we start discussing the questions, we have to remember that A Tale of Two Cities is a historical novel because it deals with a historical event, which is the French Revolution, okay? And it's written in an artistic way by Charles Dickens. So we say that it's a historical novel written in an artistic way. It's written in an artistic way because all the characters are made up by the novelist and the events are made up by the novelist too. Questions. Question A. Discuss the significance of the title. A Tale of Two Cities. The title refers to London and Paris, two capitals of the most important countries in the world at that time. Mentioning both the cities in that title was meant by Charles Dickens just to show that all the characters moved between these two cities and most of the events happened in both of them. So they play important role in the novel or throughout the novel. B. Write short notes on the life of poor people in Saint Antoine. Saint Antoine was one of the poorest areas in Paris. It was chosen by Dickens as the beginning of his novel to show how miserable the poor people and the peasants were. People in Saint Antoine were miserable, hungry, and so poor. Even the children had the faces of old people because of the starvation they suffered from. The shops that were in Saint Antoine were shops that sold the worst pieces of meat or the worst pieces or loaves of black bread. There was another kind of shops in Saint Antoine, the shops that sold the weapons. The weapons were so shiny and bright, and they were placed as if they were going to be used. C. The theme of bloodshed is conveyed through the scene of the broken barrel discussed or explained. As we said before, that the broken barrel scene foreshadows the bloodshed that is going to take place after the breaking out of the revolution. The red color chosen for the wine by Charles Dickens and the way the wine spread everywhere when the barrel was broken indicates what is going to happen when the nobles and the king will be killed by the peasants and the poor after the breaking out of the revolution. Blood will fill the streets just like the wine or the red wine that filled the streets in Saint Antoine. D. Monsieur de Varges had more than one important role to play at the beginning of the novel discussed. Number 1. Monsieur de Varges was the head of the Jack, and he was the leader of the secret work that was going on against the nobles and the king, and that was preparing for the breaking out of the revolution. This secret work was preparing for the breaking out of the revolution. What is more, Monsieur de Varges was the owner of the wine shop, which was the center for the meetings among those Jack. And Monsieur de Varges was also the old servant of Dr. Manette. When Dr. Manette was released from the Bastille, Monsieur de Varges kept him in his wine shop and took good care of him. E. Dr. Manette had long been given up as dead and is now like a man who has been dug out of his grave. Explain with reference to Mr. Lorry and Lucy's visit to Dr. Manette. Dr. Manette had been a Bastille prisoner for more than 18 years. This long imprisonment for no guilt or sin affected him mentally and physically in a very bad way. After his release from the Bastille, he lived in the care of his old servant, Monsieur Devarge, who became the owner of a wine shop and the leader of the Jack. On hearing the news about Dr. Manette's release and that he was still alive, Mr. Lorry, his loyal English friend, told Lucy, his daughter, and they traveled to Paris in order to take Dr. Manette back to England and help him live peacefully. F. Mr. Lorry misunderstood Monsieur Devarge's treatment of Dr. Manette explained. Mr. Lorry was angry because Monsieur Devarge locked Dr. Manette in a room. But Monsieur Devarge's justifications were that Dr. Manette had been locked in a room in prison for a very long time. Locking him in the room would mean safety for him. He would feel that this place was safer. Mr. Lorry was angry with Monsieur Devarge when he saw the three Jack looking at Dr. Manette through the cracks of the door. But Monsieur Devarge's justification was that he showed him to people who the sight would do them good. He meant the Jack. Watching Dr. Manette in his awful physical and mental state or condition would represent a good motivation for the Jack to work harder and harder for the breaking out of the revolution and taking revenge on the nobles and the king for this injustice and oppression. G. How did Monsieur make good use of Dr. Manette's misery? He showed him to the Jack, who the doctor's sight in his awful physical and mental condition would do them good, as this would be a good motivation for them to work for the breaking out of the revolution. They will certainly be angry on watching this innocent man in such a horrible state, so they will do their best and work harder and harder, and the hatred in their hearts would certainly increase against the nobles and the king.